Hello friends, in this particular video we will be discussing the remaining concepts of chromatography. So in part 1 we have already talked about various terminologies related to the chromatography. Now moving ahead, the next is the column chromatography. So column chromatography is a chromatography by which the discovery of chromatography have started. So we have discussed the Michael Sweat, botanist, has used calcium carbonate as an inert stationary phase which was packed in a glass column, and he loaded some plant pigments and he could able to separate those plant pigments into individual fractions, and we could able to observe those because they were colored using a mobile phase. So he used the hexane as a mobile phase, and that is how the chromatography was invented. Now column chromatography even nowadays has been extensively used in research laboratories as well as to some extent in industries to isolate or purify the compounds. It is widely used in the pharmacognosy or the natural products as well as the synthetic chemistry to isolate or to purify the crude synthesized compounds. So in chromatography, what we do in column chromatography, we take the glass column. So this glass column can be of different size. At the bottom we have the stopcock, and at the stopcock, just above the stopcock, we have to put some sand or the cotton wool. So this is just to hold the stationary phase, because the stationary phase, which is inert in nature, this is very finely powdered inert phase, and if you don't keep any trap there as a cotton wool or the sand, the stationary phase might come out through this particular tap. So just to hold here the stationary phase, because we have seen the stationary phase remains remains steady inside this particular glass column. So this is the packing of the stationary phase, and on the top of this stationary phase we load our sample. So your sample could be solid or liquid. So if you have a solid sample, you can directly pour in this. So usually what we do, we take a solid sample, we dissolve in a particular solvent, and we adsorb on some amount of the adsorbent, that is our stationary phase, and then we evaporate the solvent, and then we pour this particular solid powder into this. If you have a liquid, again we can do the same process. We can adsorb that liquid by diluting in a particular solvent and adsorbing on the adsorbent, usually a silica, and we can load it, or else you can directly take the liquid and carefully you can pour that liquid into the top of this column where you have the column packing. Okay, and once you pack the column and load the sample, again we add some amount of this packing material, so that when we pour the solvent system, the sample where we have loaded, that will not get disturbed. Okay, so the moment we load the sample and we add some adsorbent over the sample, we add the mobile phase, and now the mobile phase will try to move inside this particular packed bed. So while moving, what it will do, it will also take the sample. So based on the adsorption affinity towards the stationary phase and mobile phase, the sample components will migrate to this particular column. So those who have weaker interaction with the solid stationary phase will move faster along with the mobile phase, and those who have stronger interaction with the stationary phase, they will be moving slower. Okay, so let's say if it is a normal phase, so we know in normal phase stationary phase is polar. So if your compound is polar, so it will have a stronger interaction. If the compound is relatively non-polar, it will have a weaker interaction and it will have migration rate faster, so it will be eluting faster. Okay, so what I have told you, if your column is normal phase, the one which is eluting faster will be relatively non-polar, and the one which is eluting slower, that will be relatively polar. Okay, so column chromatography is widely used as a purification technique, and several grams of substances can be purified using this particular column chromatography. It is quite simple, doesn't require any sophisticated instruments. it is relatively cheap, but only the problem is it takes time to elute the components, and the limit of detection is usually in milligrams. Okay. Now next is the preparative chromatography. So as the name indicates, the preparative means it is a purification. So we know chromatography is a separation tool. So using this particular technique, we can purify our compound by isolating from the impurities, and we can use it for the purification. So we have an example of preparative HPLC or preparative TLC, where we purify our compound from its impurities or coeluents. So this is very popularly used as a preparative chromatography technique. Next is the adsorption chromatography. Now as the name indicates, here the separation mechanism is based on the adsorption. So we know the stationary phase is usually solid inert substance, and the components what we want to separate, we load those components on the stationary phase, and they will try to move over the surface of the stationary phase. So based on their retention or the adsorption affinity, the substances will get separated. So this particular chromatography make use of mobile phase, which is either in liquid or gaseous form, and the mobile phase is adsorbed onto the surface of the solid stationary phase. So it involves the analytical separation of a chemical mixture based on the interaction of adsorbate with the adsorbent, and the mixture of gas or liquid gets separated when it passes over the adsorbent bed that absorb different compounds at different rate. Next is a partition chromatography. So in this particular chromatography, the separation of components from the sample mixture is carried out by the process of partition or the distribution of component between the two phases. So what are those two phases? One is a stationary phase, other one is a mobile phase, and both these phases are liquid in nature. So this is also called as a liquid-liquid chromatography, and the previous one, that was adsorption chromatography, can be considered as the solid liquid chromatography, because the nature of the stationary phase was solid and the mobile phase was liquid. So we have an example of column chromatography, that is an example of adsorption chromatography. We have an example of TLC, that is again a adsorption chromatography. Now in this partition chromatography, both are liquid in nature, stationary phase as well as mobile phase. So paper chromatography, for example, is an example of partition chromatography, because in paper chromatography the stationary phase is the liquid which is entrapped or bonded with the alpha cellulose of the paper. So in this process, the immiscible solid surface coated with the liquid surface on the stationary phase, that is in the mobile phase. The liquid surface is immobilized by the stationary phase, which result in making it a stationary phase. So here the liquid is either coated on the surface of the solid supporting material, or the liquid is directly coated on the inner wall of the column. So in HPLC or GC we will be discussing different types of columns. There we will discuss in detail how we can do the coating and what is open tubular column or capillary column. So in short, here the stationary phase can be liquid, which can be a coated, or it can be a which can be directly coated on the surface, or which can be coated on some supporting material. Then next is reference standards, or these are also called as RMS in short. So as the name indicates, they are considered as a reference or the standard substances. They are usually have very high purity, so it is almost 100% pure. It serves as a basis to evaluate both process as well as the product performance, and it is referred as a gold standard. So usually reference standards are very costly, because we need to attain its purity almost to near to 100%, and because of that they are very expensive, and usually they come in small volume. Okay, now it is not affordable to all, and for all the processes we cannot use a reference standard because of its cost and availability. So what we do, we use working standards. These are the chemicals or drug substances having established quality and purity as they are compared with the reference standard, and we can use it for our routine quality control. So it is also referred as a secondary standard, and they are acceptable with comparison. Okay, so the working standard need to be compared with the reference standard, and only then you can use the working standard, whereas the reference standard doesn't require any comparison because they are already considered as a gold standard. Compared to reference standard, working standards are less expensive and they usually available in a larger volume or larger quantity. Next is an internal standard. So as the name indicates, in this internal standard we have to add known amount of this particular internal standard to every sample, both calibrators and unknowns, and instead of basing the calibration on the absolute response of analyte, the calibration uses the ratio of response between the analyte and the internal standard. So let's say if we are doing a calibration curve where we use 5 different dilutions of standard, so along with standard dilution, in each dilution we will add the known amount of our internal standard. Okay, and we have a sample whose concentration we want to find out. So in that unknown sample also we will add the known amount of internal standard. So internal standard addition is applicable in all the standard dilution as well as in the sample, and the quantity is same. It is a constant quantity to all the standard dilution as well as the sample, and this actually helps in quantification because it will encounter the volumetric loss during the sample preparation, okay, which is very quite and which is very probable. Now next is a quantitative analysis using chromatogram. So before doing a quantitative analysis using a chromatogram, generally certain requirements should be fulfilled. So the first one is identify the components to be analyzed must be established. The identity of the components to be analyzed must be established. So what components we are going to analyze, we should know the identity of those. Then separation of the specified component must be achieved. All the components have to be eluted from the column. Then sample preparation must be reproducible. We should able to reproduce that. Standards of known purity must be available, either working standard or the reference standard, and a stationary phase that separate the component in a reproducible manner. So every time we are doing or repeating the experiment, it should have the similar kind of responses or the chromatogram. So usually the chromatogram can be used for two purposes. One is a qualitative analysis, that is we can identify what the compound is. So qualitative analysis is mainly done using the retention time. So we have already studied what is retention time. So this is a characteristic time at which we are getting a peak. So we can compare the retention time with the available literature values if it is done at a ideal condition, and we can able to identify the compound. The chromatographic experiment, that is mainly the chromatogram, is very widely used for a quantitative estimation. So when we talk about the quantitative estimation, there are two things. I think one is missing here. So the first is the peak height. Okay, so we can measure, let's say if this is a peak which has been eluted, so we can touch the baseline. So we can connect this particular peak, we can put the baseline here. So from this baseline to the peak height, we can put one vertical line, and then we can measure this particular distance. So this is nothing but the peak height. So this peak height is directly proportional to the concentration of separated analyte. Okay, so more the peak height, more will be the concentration. That is very usual, and it is very simple to measure the peak height if the peaks are symmetrical in shape. Second is the peak area or the area under the peak. So this should be measured with great accuracy, and it is quite simple. So here we have to measure what is the area under the peak. Now of course nowadays we have the softwares, and the software will calculate what is the area under that particular peak. So the area under the peak is directly proportional to the concentration of a particular analyte. So usually peak heights are unaffected by the flow variations, whereas peak areas should be used for badly tailing peaks. Both are imprecise with irreproducible injection volume. So we need to consider these things when we are using it for a quantitative purpose. The third one is a calibration curve method, or it is also called as external standard method. Now here it is called as external standard method because in this particular method we are not adding any standard to the sample. Okay, so we are keeping our standard separate and we are keeping our sample separate. So usually for plotting calibration curve or standard curve, we use at least 5 different dilutions, and these 5 different dilutions of standard, let's say C1, C2, C3, C4 and C5, these are taken and these are injected and chromatogram are plotted. After plotting chromatogram, you can measure the area under the peak and you can plot it on y-axis. As these are standard, you know what is the concentration of these dilutions, that you can take it on this x-axis. Then you have your sample whose concentration you want to find out. Inject that and you will get a peak. Measure the area under the peak and then you can take it on y-axis, and then you can intercept it and you will get the concentration of your unknown. So this is very simple and useful method, that is called as external standard method or calibration curve method. Another formula is you can use area of unknown divided by area of known into known concentration, that is also possible. The fourth one is the internal standard method, which is considered as highly precise method, very widely used nowadays, and it helps to aid the quantitation in chromatography, especially when the volumetric loss of sample is probable during the sample preparation or the transfer of sample from one to the other and injecting. We have some kind of sample loss, so that will be encountered by adding the internal standard. So what we do here, we add known amount of internal standard to the sample as well as the standard. So this method is successful only when the internal standard peak should be separated well from the sample peak, because they are similar, so they should not merge with each other, they should separate, they should be resolved, and the resolution value should be greater than 1.25. So we know now what is resolution, we have studied. So internal standard peak should be close to the sample peak, but it should be well resolved, and the resolution value should be greater than 1.25. Now this particular figure is illustrating the internal standard method. So what we are doing, as I told you, now let's say we have prepared the 4 standard dilutions. So these are the 4 standard dilutions, C1, C2, C3 and C4. So these are the known standards. We know the concentration, and we have taken the concentration in the increasing order. So this A1 is nothing but the peak corresponding to your standard. Now along with this standard, we have added the constant and known amount of internal standard. Okay, so in C1, let's say C1 or the dilution 1 is your 10 microgram, then this C2 is, let's say, 20, this is 30 and 40. So because of the concentration, with respect to that, we can see the peak height and peak area has increased in this particular blue peak, whereas in this yellow the peak height as well as peak area is constant, because in all these dilutions, whether it is 10 or 20 microgram, we have added a fixed concentration of internal standard. Okay, so the blue peak is for your reference standard and the yellow peak is for your internal standard. So what we are doing, we are taking the ratio of these, and that ratio is plotted on the y-axis. On x-axis we have taken the concentration. So concentration of your standard divided by concentration of your internal standard. We know both the concentration because these are the standards. Then we can plot a calibration curve. Okay, now this method is useful to overcome the losses of our sample during the sample preparation, as you have added internal standard in the sample itself or in the standard itself. So if the sample is getting lost, the reference standard is also getting lost. Okay, so we can overcome, or we can encounter these problems, and whatever reading or the concentration you are getting with this method, that will consider all these losses, because if sample is getting lost, your internal standard is also getting lost, and as we are taking the ratio, it will encounter those problems and it will give the accurate readings. So here we can see the green one is a plot of our sample, and by interpolation method we can get the concentration. So this is very useful method known as internal standard. Then the fifth is the area normalization method, or it is also called as internal normalization. Now in this method what we do, this method is also used to avoid the uncertainties associated with the sample injection, like the previous method, internal addition method. So complete elution of all sample component is a must. So this is a requirement. All components should be eluted, and you have to ensure that. Then this method is only applicable to the mixtures where constituents are known. So you are sure that all components are eluted only when you know how many components are present in the sample and you know their identity. So based on that you can ensure, let's say 5 components are there, I have injected the mixture which has 5 components and all have been eluted. By looking at the chromatogram you will get that. So this is usually done in gas chromatography experiment. So what we do, we measure area of every peak in chromatogram, and the total area is normalized to 100%, and each peak is reported as a percentage of the total. Okay, so we'll make it simple by taking an example. Now let's say a series of straight chain alcohol were analyzed. Okay, we have a series of straight chain alcohols. So we have taken 4 alcohols, and all they are present in a mixture: methanol, ethanol, propanol and butanol. So I have a mixture, straight chain alcohol mixture, which has these 4 components, and they have been analyzed by the gas chromatography, and the total mass of my sample which I have injected is 0.0045 gram. So this is a total mass of my sample. So I know this is a total mass, and this mass contributing these 4 straight chain alcohols: methanol, ethanol, propanol and butanol. So after analyzing the chromatogram, I have calculated the area of that particular peak. Now let's say methanol is the first peak which I have separated in the chromatogram. Methanol peak size is 1.26, ethanol is 2.42, propanol is 1.88, butanol is 1.06. So these are the area of that particular peak. Now we are sure this sample component has only 4 components, okay, and all have been eluted, and we have measured the area of that. So we can now count the total area. So we can add these all values and we will get the summation value, that is total area. So this total area we are considering as 100%, okay, and based on that we can now normalize the peaks. For example, let's say in the first case of methanol, the peak size is 1.26. We are dividing that with the total area, because total area we are considering as 100%. So 1.26 divided by 6.62 multiplied by 100 as we want in a percentage. So it is a 19%. So 19% is a contribution of methanol peak. So we can now find out the mass of the methanol. So how to find out the mass of the methanol? We know the total mass of our sample is 0.0045 gram. So now we can calculate the 19% of this entire sample. So we can get the 19% of this sample by calculation, and that will be coming around 8.6 into 10 raised to minus 4. So we can write it here, the mass of methanol, that is 8.6 into 10 raised to minus 4. So this is called as area normalization method, and it will encounter the uncertainties introduced during the sample preparation. Similarly, you can do it for the other components. For example, ethanol, so it is 2.42 divided by 6.62 and multiplied by 100. So certain percentage will come. So you have to find out that percentage. Let's say 22% is coming. So you have to find out 0.0045 22%, and that will be the mass of that particular component. So this is how the area normalization method is done. Okay, so these are the quantitative methods used for chromatographic experiment. Now the next concept is the optimization of column performance. Now we know in any chromatographic system, the column is the main part of chromatography, because that is the place where actually the sample components are getting separated. So how to improvise the column efficiency, or how to optimize the column performance so that we will get better separation in a faster time. So sometimes the peaks are at the start are sharp, but at the end they becomes broader and more diffuse. So the sharpness of peak is a property of a chromatographic column, and that is described as a column efficiency. Now you can see here, this particular peak is very sharp, and this particular peak is quite broader. So if the sample is moving in this particular fashion inside the column, usually we get the sharp peak. You can see here the sample is bit diffused in a band, so the peak is getting broader. This is more diffused, so the sample is much broader, and that's why the sample peak has been becoming broader and broader. And if we get a broader peak, then it is very difficult to measure the peak height or the area of the peak. Now optimization of column performance can be better understood by studying the plate theory. So plate theory was proposed by Martin and Sinch, who has done a very pioneered work in chromatography. So what they have proposed, they assume each column contains discrete number of theoretical plates. So these discrete number of theoretical plates are the hypothetical plates present inside the column, and they assume at each plate the sample is getting adsorbed or the sample is getting equilibrated. Now for example, you consider this particular figure is nothing but a column of a particular height, and you can see we have divided the column into two parts. One is a stationary phase and the other one is a mobile phase. Okay, so in practical such kind of system is not there, but for our understanding we have used this particular diagram. So we are considering, let's say 1 2 3 4 5. So these are the 5 plates present inside this particular column. Now the moment we load the sample and we pour the mobile phase, now what will happen, the sample is getting equilibrated. So sample will get equilibrated between the stationary phase and the mobile phase. Okay, now what will happen, after some time as the mobile phase is moving, so this particular sample will fall down into the second plate. Okay, and here you can see as the mobile phase has taken the components which have been equilibrated in it, now this component will again try to equilibrate between the stationary phase and the mobile phase. Okay, similarly now the mobile phase is empty in the first plate, the fresh mobile phase is coming because there is a continuous flow of the mobile phase. So whatever amount was there in the first plate in the stationary phase, that will again equilibrate between these two. Okay, and so on. So this particular cycle will continue, and the separation of the components will happen based on its partition coefficient or the adsorption and so on. So what the Martin and Sinch want to say, each column has discrete number of theoretical or hypothetical plate, and the sample is getting equilibrated, the sample is getting distributed at each of these plates. So if the number of theoretical plates are more, the number of times the sample is getting equilibrated and the better separation will be achieved. So if I have, let's say, 5 theoretical plates in one column and in the other column I have 10 theoretical plates, so obviously the column with 10 theoretical plates will be much better for the separation. So the resolution will be better in second column which has a higher number of theoretical plates. So this concept is called as HETP, that is height equivalent to theoretical plates. So height equivalent to theoretical plates, which is also simply referred as H. Okay, so this H is nothing but L by N, where L is the length of the column and N is the number of theoretical plates. So as we can see here, H is equal to L by N. So H and L have a direct proportion. So as you increase the length of the column, we can accommodate a larger number of theoretical plates. Okay, and H and N have the inverse proportion. So smaller the value of H, more the equilibration steps will be seen in the column and it has a high efficiency. Okay, and if the number of theoretical plates are less, then it has an inverse proportion with the height. So by using this particular plate theory, if we know the plate height and if we know the width of the peak in time, we can get that by looking at the chromatogram. We can calculate the number of theoretical plates present inside the column, and in turn, with the help of this equation, we can also find out the efficiency of the column, how well column in performing the separation or resolving a particular mixture. So you can see this particular peak which have been resolved. So all these terms now we are familiar. So this is the width of the peak, okay, at the baseline, and this is the height of the peak. So height of the peak at half of the peak height, then this is at sigma t. Okay, so n is equal to TR by sigma t bracket square. So this is one equation when sigma t is given and the retention time is given. So you can calculate the value of n with this particular equation. Then next is n is equal to 5.54, which is a constant, and then the ratio of TR, that is retention time, divided by width of the peak in time at half of the peak height. So this is this one, this is W half. Okay, so bracket square of that. So this is used usually in the problem when the peak height at half of the peak width at half of the peak height is given. So you have to carefully see what is given in the question paper. So we have numerals related to this. We will be discussing those by taking some examples, but here you need to understand and you need to know this particular formula. And other one is which is very widely used, because in most of the problems we have the peak width at the baseline. Okay, so that is a WB. So WB is this particular width. So 16 again is a constant, retention time divided by WB and its bracket square. So you need to consider these equations, and usually in most of the question paper the third equation has been used because the peak width at the baseline is given. In some cases peak width at half of the peak height is given, so this formula can be used, and using this particular formula we can find out the column efficiency. Now there is another theory that is called as rate theory, because plate theory fails to explain how we can improvise the efficiency of the column. Rather it will give only the information about the comparison, or whether it is better or it is not better, okay, by looking at the number of theoretical plates. So usually minimum 2000 theoretical plates are required to consider the column useful for the separation. Okay, then rate theory will explain with these 3 points, and it will help us to improvise the column efficiency. So there are 3 main contributions in the rate theory which is responsible for the band broadening. So first is a eddies diffusion, or it is also called as a multiple path effect. Second is a longitudinal molecular diffusion, and the third is a path transfer resistance or mass transfer resistance. So this particular theory is having an equation known as Van Dimter equation. So Van Dimter equation is nothing but the contribution of these three, that is nothing but the rate theory. Okay, so longitudinal diffusion is abbreviated as A, which is nothing but 2 lambda dp. Then molecular or the longitudinal diffusion is B by mu, that is nothing but 2 r dg by mu. And then C mu is nothing but a mass transfer resistance or path transfer resistance, which is this particular value 8k dash df divided by pi square into bracket 1 plus k dash bracket complete dl into mu. So we will be discussing what these each term means. So first is a eddies diffusion, or it is also called as a multiple path effect. So we know that when we load the sample and the mobile phase, so mobile phase along with the sample will try to find out the path, because it has to pass through the column, and the column is a packed column, so it has a void space in between the solid stationary phase. So if the column packing is not uniform, if it is not regular, what will happen? The mobile phase or the sample component will find out the multiple paths, and that is very common, that is very usual. So you can see here the first path is this one, the second path is slightly different than the first, and the third path is different from the previous two. Okay, so what path it is choosing, based on that we can get a broader peak. Okay, so if the column packing is regular, it is a uniform packing, then all will be moving at a particular fashion. Okay, they will be taking a similar path. But if the column packing or the particle size of the stationary phase is different, then what will happen? There is a different routes to pass the mobile phase along with the solute components or the sample components. So that is what is considered in the eddies diffusion. So eddies diffusion, A is equal to 2 lambda dp. So 2 is a constant, lambda is nothing but it is a measure of packing irregularities of the stationary phase. Okay, and dp is nothing but a particle diameter of the stationary phase. So what are the approaches to decrease the eddies diffusion? As we can see in this particular equation, it is directly proportional. So we have to minimize the eddies diffusion, and that can be minimized by keeping this lambda and dp at lower rate. So particle size should be less as possible, and the packing irregularity should not be there. So uniform and regular packing and small and uniform diameter of the stationary phase can work out to keep this eddies diffusion less as possible. So that is all about the eddies diffusion. Second is a longitudinal or molecular diffusion. Now here the molecules usually in a solution of high concentration tend to move towards the lower concentration by the diffusion, and hence there is a concentration gradient. So concentration of solute particle is lower at the edges than in the center of the band, which causes the band broadening. So this is usually the longitudinal diffusion. So we can see here in this particular column, the solute components are in better amount at the center, whereas at the edges of the column they are very less. Okay, so this is usually the longitudinal diffusion, and this is given by the equation 2r dg divided by mu. So what is r? R is nothing but the tortuosity of carrier gas, tortuosity of the carrier gas. So that is a twisting and bending of the carrier gas. So with respect to the gas chromatography, when we talk, R is nothing but twisting and bending of the carrier gas. dg is a diffusivity of solute in mobile phase. So whatever mobile phase we have, so in case of GC it is a carrier gas, so diffusivity of solute in the carrier gas, that is nothing but the dg. So they are directly proportional to the longitudinal diffusion. So in term, what we need to do to keep the longitudinal diffusion less, R should be less and dg should be less. Okay, and what is mu? Mu is the average linear velocity of the mobile phase. So that is inversely proportional. So we have approaches to decrease the longitudinal diffusion. So dg can be decreased by increasing the molecular weight of the solute, so that it will not get diffused more into the gaseous phase. and we can increase the pressure. Okay, then we can increase the viscosity of the mobile phase, so the average linear velocity will be taken care. So considering all these things, we can minimize the longitudinal diffusion and we can lower the band broadening, we can increase the column efficiency. And the third one is the rate theory. In that, the path transfer resistance or mass transfer resistance, so it is concerned with the transfer of solute particles between the two phases. So obviously whenever something is passing through a packed column, it will definitely have some kind of resistance, and we do have a stationary phase, so that will be retarding the movement. So during this process, the mobile phase is moving rapidly and the equilibrium between the two phases may not be attained. So if your flow rate of the mobile phase is very fast, so you are not giving sufficient time for the solute to equilibrate between each plate. Okay, so we need to have the optimum flow rate of the mobile phase. So this C mu, that is path transfer resistance, is nothing but 8k dash into df divided by pi square in bracket 1 plus k dash into dl into mu. So what we can do to minimize the path transfer resistance, df is a diffusivity of solute, it is a film thickness. Okay, so that can be kept less. So approaches to decrease the path transfer resistance is, we can set the optimum flow rate and the optimum film thickness. So here we have the entire details of what this each term is. So lambda, we have seen it is a measurement of packing irregularities of the stationary phase. dp is a particle diameter of the stationary phase. Okay, so these two things we have to keep less as possible. R is a tortuosity or bending and twisting of the carrier gas or the mobile phase. dg is a diffusivity of solute in the gases or the mobile phase. Mu is the average linear velocity of the mobile phase. df is a film thickness or film thickness of liquid stationary phase. So usually we have seen liquid is immobilized on the surface of the solid support, or it is directly coated on inner wall of the column. So what is its thickness? That is called as film thickness. So this film thickness plays an important role in the mass transfer resistance, and dl is a diffusivity of solute in the stationary phase. Okay, so that is again inversely proportional. So all together these three terms, that is the Eddy's diffusion, molecular diffusion and the path transfer resistance, is summarized in this particular graph. So this is a Van Deventer equation, H is equal to A plus B by mu into plus C mu. So on y-axis we have a plate height and on x-axis we have a mobile phase velocity. So we can see the term A, that is nothing but our Eddy's diffusion. So Eddy's diffusion does not have any effect of flow rate, so it is independent of flow rate. Okay, so you can see here the mobile phase velocity or its flow rate has been increased on x-axis, but it remains constant, whereas the term B, that is the molecular diffusion or longitudinal diffusion, so this B by mu decreases drastically in the beginning. You can see it has been decreases drastically in the beginning with increase in the flow rate of the mobile phase. Increasing the flow rate beyond a particular value, even it will remain same. Okay, so only in the initial case it will decrease drastically by increasing the mobile phase velocity, whereas the mass transfer resistance, that is C mu, that increases with the flow rate. So you can see here the green line, as you are increasing the flow rate, the mass transfer resistance is also increasing. So you have to keep the optimum flow rate, which is very important to minimize this band broadening. Okay, now next is a capacity factor, which is abbreviated as K dash. So it usually measures the retention time of a sample molecule relative to the column's dead volume. So column's dead volume is the volume of a mobile phase taken to show the void time. So you can see here K dash is calculated as RT minus V0. So V0 is nothing but the dead volume divided by V0. Okay, so RT is retention time and V0 is a dead volume. So you can calculate the capacity factor, and you should see to that this should be in the ideal range or the limits given for a particular system. Then next is a selectivity factor, which is abbreviated as alpha. So this is a term used to describe the magnitude of the difference between the relative thermodynamic affinities of a pair of analyte for the specified mobile and stationary phases that comprise the separation system. It is equal to the ratio of retention factor. Now let's say we have the two components as 1 and 2. So for each component we have the distribution coefficient. So we can take these distribution coefficient and we can take the ratio of these distribution coefficient. So that is nothing but the selectivity factor. So how much your column is selective to a particular analyte, so that can be calculated using this particular selectivity factor alpha, and the value of alpha should be in between 2 to 5 to say it is a good selectivity factor. So this is all about the various terminologies. Thank you.